Tonight we are going to talk about a core concept in chiropractic care, and that concept is the concept of the subluxation. Tonight we're going to talk about the spinal subluxation and what that means to you and your health. Now, by definition, spinal subluxation means that there is a misalignment of a vertebra that has an impact on the nervous system. So there is a nerve effect caused by the mechanical misalignment. So let's take a quick look at some anatomy before we jump into this. So here's Anatomy 101. Here is a model of the spine, and here is representation of the base of the head. We have the neck, torso area of the spine, lumbar or low back area of the spine. Here we have our pelvic complex. Our hip would actually be right here. And the spine itself is composed of 24 bones, and each bone is called a vertebra. So this is actually a vertebra, or a vertebral bone, and this is a solid mass, and off of that solid mass comes an arch with a spinous process, and part of that arch, or the job of that arch, is to contain the spinal cord within. So the arch, or the posterior portion of the vertebral body, protects and houses the spinal cord, which is also our central nervous system. And coming off of that spinal cord are these little yellow things here. These are known as nerve roots, and they all go to a muscle or a correlating muscle with that spinal level. So in between each vertebra, we have a cartilaginous material called an intervertebral disc. I'm just going to refer to it as the disc. And the disc job is to maintain height so that this nerve root maintains its life unimpaired. But also the disc job is to allow 360 degrees of flexibility and movement, all while maintaining these vertebral bodies on center with the vertebral body above and below it. And this is a real important concept. As long as everything's on center, things are doing good. Once things come off center, that's where problems usually develop. So just looking at the anatomical structure, we have the vertebral body with the disc, which constitutes the anterior joint of that level. And then we have the two facets in the back that articulate with the level above and below it. And those constitute the posterior joint. So at each level we have three joints that are made up like a tripod. So each level is a tripod stacked on top of a tripod. If things are on center, everything's great. If something comes off center, that's usually where problems start to arise. So with this said, we're going to go into here, I'm going to show a little graphical representation of the upper thoracic area or torso, and all levels are numbered from the top down. In the cervical area we have C1 through C7, T1 through T12 in the torso, L1 through L5 in the lumbar or the low back. So here I represent graphically T2 has come off center with T1 and T3. And what that shows is that the vertebral body's moved forward. We show that the disc itself has some torsion on it. I'm trying to show here that the facets in the back here are jamming and that the facets up here are gapping. And there's also a change in the clearance around that nerve root, where this nerve root here is being compressed by the disc, and this one has more space. Now, things are dynamic. Things happen differently every time. This is just, a quick representation of the things that could go wrong when we have a spinal subluxation. So now we're going to look at a cross view or a sectional view looking down on that T2 vertebra. So here we move over here and we see the vertebral body, which is where the disc is. We have the arch around the spinal cord. We have the two facets on the back side of the arch, and then we have the spinous process coming off of that. And the spinous process is that bony part that when we touch back here we can feel those little bumps. Those are our spinous processes. And the green here represents the nerves. So here we have the spinal cord in the middle. We have the nerve root coming off, and the nerve root goes and innervates a muscle that corresponds with that level of the spine. There's a branch coming off that comes back and innervates the facet so it can monitor the stresses on the facet itself. And there's also a branch that comes back and feeds the spinal muscle in this level, because we have 4 layers of muscle that attach to the spine itself and control spinal movement. We have this branch coming off front, coming to what's called the sympathetic ganglia, which in turn comes back off and goes and innervates an organ. So this is what I want to talk about right now, is this sympathetic ganglia. First of all, what's sympathetic? Well, let's have another quick anatomy lesson. Our autonomic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that just controls all of our organs, and it all functions automatically, we don't have to think about it. It's made up of 2 primary systems, a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic turns things on, parasympathetic turns things off. So most of our organs function similar to how our thermostat functions in our house. If I was to set my temperature to be 68 in my house, at 66 the sympathetic would turn the heater on until the temperature got to 70, at which point the parasympathetic would turn it off until the temperature went back down to 66. At that point, sympathetic would once again turn back on. So what we would have is a series of on-off impulses, and there would be a slight variance in the temperature, but the average would be 68 degrees. It's very similar to how our organs are functioned. They're controlled by sympathetic and parasympathetic impulses. So the sympathetic ganglia is the primary ganglia that attaches to the front of the vertebral body at each level of the vertebral series. So there's also parasympathetic ganglia, but the sympathetic is the primary, and that's what I want to focus on today, just to keep things simple. So if we have a subluxation at this level, we know that this nerve root, if it has any impairment to it, because of that subluxation, we will see a change in muscle tone. The muscle will either become spasmed or it will become inhibited, and the muscle strength will be weaker. Same thing to say about the spinal muscles here. They may become spasmed or they may become weaker. So we know that if there's a subluxation causing an impairment to this nerve root, that we have 2 functional aspects that we see a change in. Well, theory would say that the sympathetic tone to this organ would be changed also. Yeah, it's pretty hard to go in and probe organs and see if there's any change to the tone of an organ. So what's been done retroactively is over the last several decades, multiple times there have been cadaver studies in which they've looked at areas of arthritic processes. And an arthritic process to a facet joint or a disc are usually indicative of some type of a subluxation. And they found that 100% of the time that there was an arthritic process at this level, and they traced this sympathetic nerve down to that organ was usually out of normal tolerance. Either the organ grew too big or it grew too small, and that would suggest that through the lifetime of that person, there was a change to the way that organ at that level functioned. Now, not all times has that organ been related to the cause of death, but sometimes it has been. So this is a very interesting finding. We know on a day-to-day level we can test the muscle strength and we can look for muscle spasms and see how they correlate with subluxations. Therefore, we have to suspect that if we see the change here, that there's also a change in sympathetic stimulation to that corresponding organ. Now over here I drew a list, and this shows all of the organs and how they correspond with spinal levels. So T2 actually corresponds with the heart. So what we would expect based on the theory that if we had a subluxation at T2, we could see some change in sympathetic tone to our heart. Now, if we go down to T6 sympathetic ganglia controls the stomach. I know from experience that when I was a child, I had a chronic stomach acid problem. My stomach would never turn off. I was on special diets. I was drinking Maalox out of the bottle. This went on for several months. Nothing ever changed. At the suggestion of a neighbor, my parents took me to a chiropractor, and after a few visits, my stomach went back to normal. So I know from firsthand experience that the subluxation concept actually does play out. This is one of the reasons why I became a chiropractor. After that, I chose chiropractic to be a primary source of my health care. I've gone to a chiropractor my whole life. I use it to keep me healthy. And this is the model of my health approach. I'm keeping nerve interference off of the sympathetic tone to all of my organs, and I manage my health that way. So this becomes a very interesting health paradigm concept, doesn't it? Because last decade we saw this big move towards wellness care. Yet this decade we're seeing insurance companies withdraw payments from wellness care. The new concept or the new paradigm in insurance payouts is going to be medical necessity. It's already beginning. Whether you realize it or not, it has already begun. And so what we're seeing is a pullback of insurance companies covering anything that has to do with wellness or prevention. So here, sitting at our doorstep, is the chiropractic profession that has a model that works in that wellness paradigm, and it works very, very, very well. And it works very simplistically. What we're doing is we're resetting any overstimulation to our organs by adjusting the spine and keeping the spine itself healthy, therefore keeping the nerve and the central nervous system healthy, therefore managing our health in a way to where we're trying to achieve optimal health. And the fact that it's one of the simplest modalities out there just makes it even more attractive.